Thank you, Janie. Wow, I've never been here, and so walking and seeing this, now I feel like I'm back at Laguna preaching again. So this is not too bad. It's just phenomenal how this is so similar to when I was pastor at Acoma and Laguna for 4 years there. I was a Franciscan for 17, and 10 of those years was as a Franciscan priest. And then just a little history. Then I met Lucinda, and then that's all been history. We started a winery and vineyard. The friars taught me how to drink. There was two things they taught me: how to smoke good cigars and drink great wine. And so so we started at Guadalupe Vineyards. But first, before we begin, I want to get this as informal. If you have questions, just to raise your hand. Because this is very fluid, just like the culture. Everything moves in and out of discussion, of listening, hearing, questioning. And I just want to ask, just to find out, how many of you are from New Mexico? Oh, wow, okay. And then how many of you have been here for more than 25 years? Okay. And how many have been here more than 5? And who are visitors visiting New Mexico? Okay. The visitors seem to always know more than those who are from New Mexico. So that I already know, they already have done their homework. So it's always the case that anywhere I go, it seems like the people, I grew up in New Mexico. I'm from the village of San Rafael in New Mexico, not too far from Acoma. It seemed like more people that came from out of state knew more about Acoma, Laguna, and even San Rafael than I knew, being a native of the area. But what we're here to listen and talk about is most of it, what I'm going to share. I'm not a great scholar, but I do have a lot of experience of working among the Pueblo people. I went to school with many members from Acoma, Laguna when I went through school at St. Teresa's and Grants, and then later on went to high school. Junior high, and what was interesting, everybody lived from their different communities. We're all bused to one school, and everybody came from different communities. We got to know, but we never really went to each other's communities and participated in each other's communities. We just got to know each other at the school, and then we all participated. And in the western side of the state, it's really interesting, like in Grants and the Cibola County, not only were there Native Americans and the Hispanics of old, but there was the new immigrants, of the Basque, the Lebanese, the Anglo cowboy rancher. And so I grew up in a very diverse and rich of cultures. And so we all came from different traditions, and whether it was Native American, Hispanic Catholic, Anglo Protestant, or and many of the Lebanese that came, or we also had the Jewish community. We had the Godlips, we had the Bebos. So we all were in this melting pot that affected everybody that grew up, especially in the ranching and agricultural community of Cibola County. And so, but one of the things that was always constant within the communities, at least for 400 years, were the Franciscans. And so, just to give you my personal experience, I grew up in this church in San Rafael. It was run by the Franciscans. The village that I live in today was the headquarters. The Franciscans came, as everybody knows, in 1598 with Juan de Oñate, and they came to evangelize, to bring the faith to the people. And when they came, they also founded all these missions, and one of ours it's a recent one, a new one. In 1860, San Rafael was founded with Fort Wingate at the time, but it was eventually staffed by the Franciscans. But San Fidel at the time in 1910 was a community that served Acoma, Laguna, San Rafael, San Mateo, and all the Spanish villages of Cubero and Cebolleta. And so, because that's all I knew, I was very interested of the Franciscans, and so I entered the Franciscan seminary. And that was a cultural shock. Here I am. I had to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, and what was shocking was that everything was green. It rained, and I couldn't see the sky anymore. All I saw were trees, and it was just a culture shock that at first I loved it because we didn't have rain. When I saw the Ohio River, my God, I was thinking, God, we could grow more corn, And I even started a garden at the seminary for chili, and I remember growing these bushes, and when I saw these bushes, and I said, my God, we could start growing chili here in Ohio and make lots of money. And only did I find out that the chilies got waterlogged, they tasted like bell peppers, and then I understood why they didn't grow chili in Ohio. But the Franciscans were a big influence in my life, in the communities that they served, and especially what happened for me was that I eventually worked among the Mexican communities in Albuquerque at Holy Family in the South Valley, then in Roswell in the poor parishes there of St. John's, and in Juarez, Mexico. And so that's all I did, was just work among the Hispanic, Mexican, migrant communities, and I loved it. But what happened was that in 1996, they asked me to come to Acoma and Laguna. And I was like, I don't want to go there. I know the history. I don't know. I'll be the first Hispanic friar to come back, and I already know what they did to the first one. And since most of you know the story, that when the Pueblo revolt, they threw the friars over the cliff. And I thought, I don't want to reenact that. And so I was very reluctant, but I did take the vow of obedience, and my provincial said, you're going. So I said, okay, I'm going. And so I was to be made pastor of Laguna and Acoma, not just only Acoma, but Laguna, and I was going to reside at Laguna. So has anybody ever been to Laguna? Okay, it's a wonderful place, and it's very holy ground. And Laguna, the church was built on top of their sacred grounds. It's a big cemetery. And they found the place to build the church was to be on the grave. And so anytime I had to do anything there, I knew it was going to be no. Like if I had a water leak, just to dig, it was going to be a big issue. But it was very sacred. It was a wonderful place. And then I had 11 missions altogether because, as you know, in Laguna, they have 6 villages, and each village had their own church. At Acoma, they had 3 churches. And so I went in my little geo-tracker from place to place. I used to wear a dress, a nice little brown one with a nice little cord. But I loved it. But what I loved was that I thought it was going to be my worst assignment because of the history. And I thought, I just didn't want to deal with all of the history. Because I knew about the history, and I knew how they felt about the church and how the Catholic religion was forced among the people. But when I got there, I discovered a vibrant community of faith happening, and I was like shocked because I knew about the history. I read about it, and I studied about it. I lived near the area, and I kind of was resistant even to going in my assignment to Acoma, Laguna, but I did nonetheless. And so, but what I was thinking was 1492, okay? So we all know about 1492 and Columbus and so forth, and we know about Queen Isabella. Now, Queen Isabella, the reason why the Franciscans had so much authority and so much power was that Queen Isabella was also a third order Franciscan. Okay? She took on the vows also, as a lay person, as married to Ferdinand, as a Franciscan. So she really loved the ideals of St. Francis of Assisi, about serving the poor, about being among and the ideals and the philosophy and the theology of the Franciscans. She really accepted that and became a member in the third order. The first order being the men, the priests, the brothers, second order being the poor clerics, the women religious, then the third order of the laity being anyone else that would wanted to be a member, and Queen Isabella. And so when the friars came, they came to Mexico City, they had a lot of authority, and they were called to evangelize. Now in South America, it was different, in Brazil especially, because the Jesuits had more power with the kingdoms of Portugal. And so they had more exclusive rights, And back then in the monarchy, in the history, and this is why it's so important to understand of what happened that created the memory that we still remember today. And a lot of the people of Acoma, and I'll tell you something, 1998, the 400th anniversary, I was there in the thick of it because they still remembered it as if it was yesterday. And then, so I had to go and do some history, and I understood that Queen Isabel and the friars came, but with authority comes power, and with power, there's abuse of power. And it was no different for the Franciscans. It got to their head. And so they abused it, and they used it. And so that's part of the history. The other thing was the exploitation and colonization. The way I can explain it is that, Spain was no different than the United States of today. There's this sense of power that we all feel. And when you have that, any country has that, there's like, well, we can do anything. And there's an arrogancy that comes that even when we go to Europe or to other parts of the land, there's a resistance to that arrogancy that they see in the United States. And then we see that especially with Muslim countries, where there's a resentment and even an anger towards us. Well, that was what was happening out here, is that, that arrogance and that domination, even though we mean well, it was not done well. And especially, they thought, well, because we're smarter, we have more technology, we're the better group. But what it did was put someone else lower, and especially in the indigenous people. And so we saw that, especially in the exploration and the colonization, but it all came down to God and gold. Okay, today, what's our gold? Oil. Back before gold, it was spice. The spice roots in Italy, that's where Italy grew in the Renaissance period, is that they were making money with the spice roots that they developed in the Near East, in the Far East. And then there was always God. We have that today, there's these groups that, you need to believe in God, but the way I believe, And there's an arrogancy, and that was happening. Not much has changed sometimes. When I was looking at the history, that not much has changed today in our attitudes, and we're now a superpower as Spain. So think of how the United States acts out its power and its authority, and thinking that we have the right to do many things. It was no different than Spain. But at the time, the religious institutions had the authority. And now here in the United States, it's hard because religious institutions don't have that same authority because of the separation of church and state. But back then, they sure did. And it sure made things complicated. Let's just put it that way. It sure made things. The other thing that was going on was the Spanish Inquisition. When the friars came over, and the Spanish Inquisition, we have our Spanish Inquisition today. You know what it's called? Unpatriotic. If you don't agree with something, you must be unpatriotic. That's the first label. But what was before that? You must be communist if you're questioning something. Okay? So there's always been a time period. Here, the Spanish Inquisition said, if you don't believe in the Catholic Church and the doctrines of the Catholic Church, you're a heretic. Put him to death. But what happened was they created this fear-based faith and theology and philosophy that anybody could turn anybody in, and then there was the Inquisition. You were brought before, I'll say, I won't blame the Franciscans, I'll blame the Dominicans, okay? The Dominicans did the Inquisition, okay? And all you have to do is read The Name of the Rose. That was kind of, the story by, I forgot his, Umberto Eco. And that was what was going on. And so the Spanish Inquisition, it was like, if you didn't, they used the church, and the church loved it because it gave them authority, that if you didn't go and follow these doctrines, you were a heretic. If you don't believe today in our system, you must be unpatriotic. There's always a group that will always point to somebody else and say how wrong you are because you disagree. It's not that you're wrong, you just disagree. But back then, so when the friars came over, they had to push the doctrine. So anything that looked heretical, first of all, what they called the pagan religions, that was the term, it was wrong. It was evil. And so the thing is that they came and they changed and they went over, like in Mexico and here, they found places that were sacred and then just put a church. That's how they colonized. Now, it was different with the English. When the English came to colonize, they never they just built away from the indigenous community, whether it was a village. Here, the Spanish didn't. They thought, no, we got to put our presence right in the middle of it, and the way to do it is put the church. Now, and it was all because there was this fear of being called a heretic, unpatriotic, communist. Nobody living under that, you toe the line, and that's how they had the religious orders toe the line, was the Inquisition. Or you're going to be sent back to Mexico City, or even worse, you're going to be sent back to Spain. So that's the pressure that the friars are under when they're evangelizing. And some of the friars that were open to the tradition, anybody ever see The Mission? It's a powerful film. What happened down in South America is exactly what happened at Acoma, okay? There were some friars that were good, and they saw that, we'll integrate. And in Christian religion, we've always used the theology or the practice of the religion to Christianize the world. And I'll give you an example. Christmas. Nobody knows when Jesus was born. But what did the church when they were in Rome at the time, why did they choose that day? They used the sun festival, the pagan festival of the Romans, to say that because of Christ, the days will always get brighter and brighter and brighter. And so they used that symbolism. Christmas trees. Does anybody know where the Christmas tree came from? The Germany. Why? Because the culture of the time and the religious practice was that they saw that certain trees were very spiritual. And in their practice, some trees, when the Christians came, they saw, they're worshiping trees. Well, no, they had this connection to nature, and these trees were sacred. And so when they first came in, they started chopping the trees down. Well, guess what happened? They started killing those that were chopping the trees down. Well, they got smart. They said, the evergreen is like Christ. It's green forever. So they started using, the practices at the time. Well, they didn't do that, and that was no different when the Spanish came. But the Spanish Inquisition was in effect, so that if you were even open to that, you must be unpatriotic. You must be a communist. Or, worst of all, you're sent back to be tried. Because then, here we just get tried under our friends and our communities. Back then, you actually got burnt. So those are all the things of 1492. That's happening. Okay, then we go next to 1598. What happens? Juan de Oñate comes to New Mexico, settles up San Gabriel here near Santa Fe. And so Juan de Oñate, he comes, and he's no different. He has, the way expeditions were sent and done out here is no different than today. You need capital. And so either your family has capital, or you find venture capitalists that will support you. And that's what Oñate and all explorers did. Because what were they looking for? Gold. Because it was like their investment. We're going to invest, and we're going to try to find, and it's no different than speculation with oil. If anybody's been in the oil and gas industry, when you're down in Roswell, and I never knew this, but people are betting hedges to develop a well. And if they hit it, boom, they're going to be getting royalty checks. If they don't, you spent and wasted all this money. And that's how it was with all these expeditions coming, because they all knew they hit the gold, they hit the lottery when they hit Mexico City, where there was gold. And then with Esteban going back and reporting to Coronado that there's gold in Zuni, well, that motivates, greed motivates. And that's what happened. And so that is part of it. But Juan de Oñate is one of those individuals that gets capital, comes up there. He has a lot at stake, but with it, he has to keep a tight ship. He doesn't want any rebellions among his own men, within the friars, and the communities now that he's been given this land grant over. Massacre at Acoma. First year. He's sending a contingent to Zuni. They stop at Acoma. Something happened. 12 Spanish soldiers are killed, one of them being the nephew of Juan de Oñate. And he says, I can't have this. Sends a whole contingent, an army, goes up to Acoma. They slaughter about 400 people up there. What happened in the movie The Mission is no different than what happened at Acoma. Not only that, the survivors of those men were brought, and to show, that as an example, they took 300, there was 400 brought, and anybody that was under 25, their right foot was amputated. That was brutal. Being stationed at Acoma, they tell me this every day. All you have to do is take the tour at Acoma, and they'll remind you. It's like yesterday. So that's the story of Acoma. And I remember in 1598, I wasn't there. 1998, I am stationed at Acoma at the 400th anniversary, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, and I don't know if you were here, but in the Albuquerque Journal, New York Times, there's this thing of the people not wanting to have Oñate's name mentioned anywhere. Because for the indigenous people, and especially the people at Acoma, Oñate was no different than Hitler. Okay? So that's the bottom line. And I'm the pastor. Okay? So, and I'm the Spanish descendants of these people that came. That is amazing, because then some 20, 30 years later, Friar Juan Ramirez, if you hear the story at Acoma, the tour, a child falls over. The legend of the child that falls over. Friar Juan Ramirez is going to come to take over and build a church. He's assigned. And so this child falls over. Whatever happens, the people accept Friar Juan Ramirez into the community. That was a miracle, because especially after what had just happened. So in 1629, they start building the Church of Acoma. And then it wasn't until 1634, 1640, everybody has their, but the church is finished. And the church, and then people and elders would say that the church is over one of the sacred kivas. But they built it, and then if anyone has taken the tour knows how they built it and what it took to build it. The construction. But then in 1680, we have the Pueblo Revolt. And that's what I was fearing when I was assigned. And especially it looked real close in a reenactment in 1998 with another Pueblo Revolt, remembering what had happened. And so the Pueblo Revolt happened. Friars were killed. Here in, there's the martyrs, the Cross of the Martyrs here in Santa Fe, commemorating the friars that were killed. So, and then De Vargas returns with the Conquistadora, and now, which is now at the Cathedral of the Basilica. So that's the history, of, and where is St. Francis, the bird saint, in all of this? Okay, the bird bath saint. Okay, that we all come to love and adore. Where is it within this history? Where is it within this, because eventually you come to see an interconnection between the two cultures, because it's the cultures that collided. Okay, in the Pueblo region, one of the things, no one is able to go, as you know, and participate with them in, in their traditional doings, as it's called. Like if, and it was no different, how many of us grew up Protestant or Catholic? Well, you're not going to go to the Protestant church, or you're not going to go to the Catholic church. There was that type of separation. But here, it's a little deeper. They just don't want to expose themselves anymore for the judgment that was placed on them before the Pueblo Revolt. And so the Pueblo Revolt forces the religion to go underground. It was a blessing and a curse. In my experience, the blessing was that because it went underground, it became more powerful. And it has continued to this very day to be very strong. And so that they closed down everything at Acoma when they have their traditional doings. And so, but the other thing too, in the Pueblo tradition, they're very connected to the natural world. And that's important. And they're also an agricultural people. And they're also humble people. There's a sense of humility. One of the things working at Acoma and Laguna at St. Joseph's, that nobody's to bring attention to themselves. That's kind of frowned on. And it's hard because no one should be brought the attention to. So in the Pueblo tradition, you have those characteristics. And there's other things, but then I would have to kill you if I told you, because if they found out I said any other thing. And then the Franciscan tradition, there's also the vow of, poverty, obedience, and chastity, all to act in humility, to service in humility. And in the natural order, the big thing that the friars followed is the canonical of Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. That everything is connected, we are connected to all of God's creation. And then there's always been the dialogue that started with St. Francis when he met with the Sultan. And there was the crusades that were going on at the time. And that he went to convert the Sultan, but the Sultan was so impressed with St. Francis. I don't know if you know the legend, but he impressed the Sultan so much that the Sultan gave him free passage. Because he didn't come with any arms, he didn't come with any doctrine, he just came with a heart of love. And so that there would be dialogue with other religions. Today, the friars, it's called the custody of the Middle East. And what it is, if you go to all the Christian churches in Jerusalem, Syria, Lebanon, all the places where Jesus is run by the Franciscans. Why? Because the Muslims also have it in their story about St. Francis meeting with the Sultan. So they're the go-between between the cultures of the Muslim traditions and the Christian traditions. And so they're the caretakers of those churches. So there's been that history of dialogue. The marriage. This is what I call the marriage. It was a forced marriage between two cultures, okay? It was an arranged marriage that didn't always work. But they had to live with each other. There was two clash of cultures, and the Franciscans, being part of the spirituality of the Spanish conquistadores and the Spanish traditions, that was one part. But one of the things that when I was assigned to Acoma and Laguna, I didn't really know about their religious tradition. And there's, 5 things that I found that were so similar. They do have a certain mysticism. And the Franciscans have a sense of mysticism, which is connected through, seeing God through nature, out of God's creation. One of the things I had done, I don't know if anyone has ever done or knows about the pilgrimage of Santiago, in Spain. I did it with the Franciscans. It's a wonderful experience. And I thought, I'm going to do this for Holy Week. I'm going to start a pilgrimage from Laguna to Acoma, and which is still continuing today. And then the people were saying, well, Father, we have pilgrimage. We make pilgrimages, but you didn't teach us how to do that. We've always had it. Oh, I didn't know that. They also have a Lent that falls at the same season as the Christian Lent. Theirs is a little shorter, but they have Lent. We have our priests, they have their Kiva leaders. They have, there was a lot of similarity between the two traditions, that when those that practice the Catholic, there was, it's kind of close to the, to our traditions. Because I was surprised, I'll tell you, in that 1598 anniversary, I wanted to do a service at Acoma as pastor to, one of the things is it was like, it was still in their memory, like yesterday. And I thought it would be nice to do a reconciliation service and bring the groups that had done injustice to the people of Acoma and all Pueblo peoples in the encounter. So I had talked to the governor, I had talked to the caciques, the leaders of the people there who lead the traditional, and then I talked to certain individuals. Oh, I wanted to talk to the Kiva leaders. And then I said, well, Father, we don't know if we want you to know who the Kiva leaders are. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And then I get a call. Okay, Father, the Kiva leaders agreed to meet with you. And I said, oh, okay, wow. So I go for a meeting with the Kiva leaders. When I went in and saw the Kiva leaders, who they were, 70% were the ones I was seeing in church. Two of the head Kiva leaders were the two head Kiva, they were my sacristans. And it was kind of like, wow, okay. So, and then I talked to them because once I found out who one of the Kiva leaders was, I said, no, I'll just say Pat. Pat, I need help because I don't know the cultures. I don't want to be insensitive. I don't want to start another incident here. And so any idea that I bring up, just tell me it's a bad idea, that the people won't accept it. He said, oh, I got a great way to communicate that with you. So if you have a bad idea, Father, I'll just tell you you're right at the edge of the cliff. You might as well, If it's a good idea, I'll just say, Father, you're pretty far from the edge. You're safe. And so that's how we communicated, because I would have, and I'll give you an idea of what I wanted to do was this reconciliation. And right away he says, you're at the edge. And I says, well, I want to bring reconciliation. It's not, because also, remember, the Catholic Church with its priests have the whole issue of the sexual abuse scandal. And the reason it was so horrific is the church didn't own up to its sin with its priest. Well, for 400 years, the church hasn't owned up to the sin of the Acoma people. That's why, as long as there's no ownership of the wrong, it's like yesterday. And so when I dialogued with the governor, who was Greg Shativa at the time, and some of the Kiva leaders, they said, that's right. There won't be forgiveness. And then in their traditional ways, I can say is that forgiveness is one of their highest tenets, doctrines that they all try to strive for. And I says, that's us too. Jesus, if I was God, and the way we believe, if I was God and my son was murdered, I'd just wipe the world away and start all over. I've had it. But it was about forgiveness that transformed the world. And they believe the same thing, and that's where there's a lot of parallel. It's interesting because, and I said, when I first sent the program or the description of my talk to Janie, I talked about the Franciscan influence, and then I thought, that was a bad title, but it's already too late, it's printed. There's been an influence by the Franciscans and the Pueblos with each other. It's mutual. It's not just one-sided. They have influenced the spirituality of the Franciscans also, because they influenced me a lot. And Acoma and Laguna will always be close to my heart. Anyway, Victoria, you'll recognize that picture. She took that, or her husband took that. Oh, she took this picture. She gave us some wonderful pictures. But anyway, the thing is that one of the things in Franciscan spirituality, and you see this ever so present, Pope Francis, my God, has done more than 2 centuries of leadership with the papacy and power. And, this man, by his actions of humility and being connected in relationship, has done more to transform. And see, that's the one thing. I don't know if you ever heard of Fritjof Capra, wrote the Tao of Physics. Wonderful book. One of the things, he's a physicist, and he was having difficulty in physics. And I was reading the Tao of Physics, and when it happened, he became a Buddhist, and being a Buddhist, he discovered that, the mysticism in Buddhism helped him in the language of physics, especially about mystery, mysticism. And it helped him to just open more doors because he always couldn't answer a lot of things, but he just started. And then finally, he had a child, he and his wife, and he went to Big Sur of the Camaldolese Monastery and talked to a good friend of his named Brother David Standel. And he told Brother David, says, I have this yearning I was baptized Catholic, raised Catholic, but I'm Buddhist. And one of the things that Brother David said, well, we'll baptize him truly Catholic and truly Buddhist. And he said this because in mysticism, especially if you talk to any monks of any tradition, they're all on the same plane. There's no division. Brother David said, what divides us is the doctrines of the priest. And so that's what happened at Acoma and the Franciscans and the traditional. We have this wonderful mysticism that is so parallel that we can walk into each other's worlds. But it was the doctrines of, on our part, the priest, that separate us and said, this is how you're different and it's wrong. And so since then, there's been 400 years, ever since de Vargas came back, the Spanish and the church learned its lesson to tread lightly, not to make the judgments, even though the Inquisition but the pain of what happened with the revolt. And by the way, the Acomas always remind me, they says, we're the only military campaign that beat the United States, not the United States, the European Spanish before the whole thing that happened with England and the Armada. But it was interesting that, the thing is of mysticism, and what I was getting at is Pope Francis has done that, just in simple acts of charity. And so that's where it's about acts of charity. And that's one thing that has happened through the years, though there was glitches and there was heartache, and there's been an acceptance, because one of the things that will come, their songs. One of the things, the similarities was one of the elders says, Father, we sure miss our Latin songs. And I said, why? I like the guitar mass, and I enjoy bopping around. And he said, oh, no, because the Latin and the chant is no different than our traditional songs that we sing in our doings. They invoke mystery. The other thing, and this is what's amazing, feast days. Have you been to feast days? Raise your hand if you've been to the feast days. Incredible. That's going to be the only time outsiders can come to see a glimpse of their traditional ways and how that got incorporated. Because as a priest, when I would celebrate up at Laguna on St. Joseph's Day, they have 2 feast days. They like to party. No, I'm just kidding. They have March 19th, which is the authentic, and then they have their harvest feast day on September 19th, 6 months down the road. Acoma on September 2nd. One thing, when you go, and as a priest, I didn't know where the Catholic began and the traditional ended, or where the traditional began and the Catholic ended, because it was so intertwined with the songs, the dances, the celebration, the prayers. Everything was, and the dances that you see up there in honor of the saint that's the patron of the place. It's amazing. And so it was just like, after a while, you start looking like each other. Like in marriage, we start looking like our spouses. That kind of happens in cultural, situations over over hundreds of years. And so the feast days is a culmination of all of that. And so, when you go to feast days, one of the things, you go and you leave. And what's the experience that most people have? They don't know what to say. They just know that, wow. When you go into Acoma, you go into the church, it's like, wow. There's something spiritual. It's not about being Pueblo or Franciscan. There's just something holy. And that's what I have learned from the Pueblo traditions, and I hope that they were able to learn. Because one of the things is that as a priest, it was just, I miss them tremendously. They still call me Father. I remember I was up at Feast Day of the Governor. It was Governor's Feast Day, and they were dancing, and I saw the governor and his administration. I thought, I'm going to go say hi, but I had to go way around behind him. And so I'm standing behind them, and then one says to the other, yeah, we saw Father Antonio and his wife Lucinda, and so, so it's kind of nice. And so the people are wonderful, and there was just a sense of, the whole thing of spirituality that transcends doctrines. The issues that happened with Acoma were the doctrines. And I have to be right, and you're wrong. And it's no different than what we face today. And so it's a situation that we're always encountering, whether it's oil, whether it's religion, whether it's philosophies or cultures or the American way or the Muslim way, But the thing is we come to this marriage of mysticism, pilgrims, and all of the religious leaders, as I was saying, we supported each other. I would tell people, one of the things, I know this is, sometimes somebody always called me the Friar Tuck, bending the rules all the time, but I loved it. I've been an anti-establishment man. I'd listened to, as my mom said, I listened to too much rock and roll. But one of the things was that when they had their traditional doings, one of the persons said, oh, Father, I got to go participate in my kiva. I'm not going to be able to make Sunday Mass. And I thought, well, why do you have to go to Sunday Mass? And then I said, enough of this. I just wrote a letter as the ruler of this kingdom. No, I didn't say that. I said, as pastor of this parish, I am not going to have Mass on the weekend, so nobody has to make a choice. Just pray for me in your traditional doings. It was incredible because then all of a sudden, the kiva leaders were sending everybody, you got to go to church. And I'll tell you, one of the most beautiful things that happened was that stories of the Franciscan spirituality it was for Christmas. My first Christmas up there, I was told, Father, I told him about this Mass schedule. Oh, but Father, we're going to the midnight Mass at Acoma at San Esteban. And I said, I'm the priest. I don't have anything scheduled up there. And they said, oh, well, we have Mass anyway. Okay. So I thought, being a curious priest, and I was wondering who's taking my authority away. And so I thought, I'm going to go see what's going on. So after my last Mass at 10 o'clock, it was finished at 11:30, I go up. And at 12 o'clock, it was interesting. They had this, has anybody been there for Christmas? I recommend, if you have the opportunity, go to Acoma on Christmas Eve at 12 o'clock. They'll have a big bonfire. And so I was there, and so there was the huge community of Acoma was there. And then all of a sudden, there's a sacristan that has been passed on from family to family. It's the Sky clan, Water clan. And I didn't know this. And so the head clansperson, the male, he had the old, when the friars were there in the 1600s, the old cross. And he knocked on the door, and they opened it up, and it was beautiful because there's no electricity, it's all the candle lights. And then they have two armored, and they have the infant Jesus up on the altar. And what he did was mimic what they could remember and pass on from generation to generation and through centuries. Because there was no priests from 1840 to 1910 at Acoma. The last time there was vestiges of that is Willa Cather's story of death comes to our archbishop. But the Spanish friars left, and there was, the Franciscans that didn't come back till 1910. But in the meantime, since there was no priest, they kept the tradition going. And so they called it their Mass. And so when I got to go up there, and they were kind of suspicious, what's Father doing here? No priest has ever come to this. And so I was just... And so I saw, and then they said, oh, Father, we'll show you. And they had the old vestments. They had kept everything from the Pueblo Revolt. It was beautiful. They had the old sacramentary in Latin from the 1600s. Now, the thing is, you won't be able to go up the stairs, but they'll let you go in, and then they bring baskets that they pray, and they celebrate everything in fours. The 4 colors that are in the Vigas here, the 4 directions, everything, their sacred number is 4. So for 4 days, they will celebrate Christmas with their dances. But Christmas Eve, it's just beautiful. And so I was there and then the following year, well, that night, I went and was being, introducing myself to the leaders there, and they're all in a bonfire. They're circled. It's some of the Kiva leaders, all the tribal administration, and the war chiefs. Well, they all said, "Oh, Father, why don't you just stay the night?" I'm like, I got Monday morning, I got Christmas morning masses at 6 in the morning and 8 and the whole schedule. I said, "No, but I'll think about it for next year." But one of the things that I noticed is that they're always smoking, and that's part of their traditional doings. So, and I'm a cigar person. The friars taught me well. And so the following year, I thought, I'm going to take my cigars. I don't smoke, but I enjoy a good cigar. Cuban, if anybody's interested. But so I go up there, and I said, and then every week I would say Mass in the sacristy. There's a sacristy on this side, and every Wednesday I would say Mass for the traditional leaders that never came down. And so, I got to make sure that I'm okay. I still got some little time. So anyway, it was wonderful because when I brought the cigar, they said, "Who told you?" I said, "Told me what? I just enjoy cigars." "Oh, well, we got nervous because you were going to pray more than we were." And so it was, there was this camaraderie. There was this sense of, we're here all together to love one another, serve one another, and if our tradition can help you, great. If your tradition can help us, great. And so that was the marriage of, and then finally, I wanted to talk about my beloved St. Joseph's School. It serves the children of Acoma, Laguna. It was founded in 1923 when the friars came back. And it was to serve the Spanish and Native American communities, to transcend and to encourage that marriage of all the children, through the children. And so it was to educate the Laguna, Acoma, and surrounding Spanish villages. But now that I'm there, I never thought I'd be at the school. The school was floundering. It only had 13 students. The bishop had called and said, "Antonio, we really could use, people really liked what you did at Acoma Laguna. Can you help us with the school?" So I said yes. And so now I am working there to incorporate and continue the marriage of respecting each other's traditions. And so go to our website. I should have wrote that down, stjosephsmissionschool.com. We have a community garden to respect their traditions. Marla Allison is one of our art teachers to continue the art program. And then we're trying to teach Creason and continue the language. But also, we allow, the traditional things that they do, and we invite the governors of both Acoma and Laguna to participate, their traditional leaders to instruct, and so that we can continue this dialogue, to work together, and to remember that it's all about God. Because one of the things that I learned, and it's part of both the Franciscan and the Pueblo traditions, an elderly woman came up to me. She said, "Father, our traditions are like 2 railroad tracks. And we're kind of like the cars on it. Our communities are the engine. And we're all going to God. We need each other. Without one or the other, we can't make it to our destination." And I thought, that is so sweet. And so that's what I would like to end on, is that, and that's on anything. We have so much division in our politics. Nobody's listening. Everybody's suspicious. I've learned a lot through my experience working among the Pueblos. And then the thing is, when I was first assigned to Acoma, I was given the keys to the churches, and I go to Acoma. It was the first time I had been to the church at Acoma, even though was only 20 miles away. And that's why I say more people who are not from here know more and have been to the places than us native. But the thing is that the spirituality, the Franciscan spirituality and the traditional spirituality are one and the same. They're the 2 railroad tracks that all lead us to our Creator. Thank you.